Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the Board of County Commissioners work session for July 23rd, 2020. The topic of today is the LEAD grant. That's going to be a discussion and potentially some direction. By way of introduction, I'm John Hutchings, the chair of the board. Also present is Vice Chair Commissioner Ty Menser and County Manager Ramiro Chavez and Assistant County Manager Robin Campbell. We have John Thunheim, our county prosecuting attorney. I'm told that Sheriff John Snoz is attending. I don't see him just yet, but that's fine. He's probably there.
Yeah,
Public Health and Social.
is.
Okay, Public Health and Social Services Director Shelley Slaughter, and we have our very own epidemiologist Marianne Ogaro, and I see Larry Jefferson. I don't know if you're senior deputy public defender. Okay, and who else did I miss, Ramiro? I don't see.
So I think you covered. Did you introduce John Thunheim?
Yes.
Okay, so I think we got to cover. And Elizabeth Petrich.
Elizabeth Petrich, Deputy Prosecuting Attorney. Is Commissioner Edwards going to make it today?
Yeah, he's running a couple minutes late.
Oh, sure. Okay. Thank you. And I'm going to start with you, Ramiro, please, to kick it off or frame it.
Yeah, this is related to the LEAD grant, and this is the Law Enforcement Assistant Diversion Program grant. Let me frame quickly, and then I will give the floor to Shelley. Maybe 3 months ago, there was an opportunity for the county to apply for a LEAD grant. And this LEAD grant will give us the opportunity to implement this program with the intent, again, to provide assistant diversion to individuals that might be arrested. Through this process, we got some feedback from the grantor. The county has been selected to use this grant, and we were in the process to see what the conditions were. When we applied for this grant, we provided, I believe, how we're going to be using this grant, and how the program perhaps may be implemented. As of recently, the grantor, and this is just my perception, changed the conditions of the grant. It has put us in the position to start having a conversation whether that is some of the new conditions will be something the county will be successful in implementing a LEAD program using this particular grant. So there is some sort of an expectation related to a timeline. The grantor is asking the county whether we like to accept the grant, as a result, accept the conditions or the new conditions of the grantor. And that's really the gist of today's conversation. And maybe I'll give the floor to Shelley to give a little more background, a little more detail. What's the LEAD grant, the amount, what is intended to do, and perhaps get to the level of detail of what the new conditions or changed conditions the grantor has put in place in order for us to use this money.
Thank you very much, Ramiro. And that's a really excellent summary of where we are at. We are at a juncture where we need to give a final decision to the Healthcare Authority, which is the funder. This particular grant is awarded through the Healthcare Authority. Thurston County Public Health and Social Services Department was the applicant on behalf of the county, and also includes all the partners that you see here on the screen today. I'm going to actually hand it over to Marianne to give a little further detail about the grant, what the original grant was that we applied for, and then where the grant stands today. And Marianne did an excellent job in not only filling out this application on behalf of all of us on a very short timeline. We were actually very happy to receive the grant award, which has since morphed into a contract, and maybe she'll say a little more about that. There was only a few counties in the state that applied and were eligible. We were really happy to receive it. But again, as Ramiro stated, There are some conditions that have changed of the grant. So we need to make sure today that we're all on the same page regarding whether we're able to move forward and accept these funds or not. So Mary Ann, can you please share a little bit more?
So to give you a little bit more detail of the specifics overall, this is authorized by a state RCW. It is considered a pilot program. The Healthcare Authority, in offering it, does intend, should you take it, to continue at 1-year increments of refunding you for the program. The amount that we applied for, which was in January, was about 1.2 million. The requirement that stays in place, independent of the amount you receive, is a 25% match. You can achieve that in a range of ways. When we applied, based on the RFA that described what they were looking for, we applied as the county would be providing all services under that through county employees. The match was primarily achieved through our indirect. The maximum you can obtain from this funding through Healthcare Authority is 10% for your indirect. So that's not our indirect rate, and that was acceptable to them at that time. The requirements for the grant in this pilot process include that you operate the program to fidelity, and that is not at all unusual for all parts of the county to be looking at operating programs to fidelity. But in this unique instance, what's also true is we have the opportunity, with no additional cost to the county, to have the National Lead Support Bureau, the folks who created, run, and advise law enforcement agencies and jurisdictions across the United States, to provide us with TA and on how to operate the program, maintain the program, and achieve the results that have been found with this program at no cost to us. DSHS is built in independently with some data and evaluation support. And what this ended up looking like is approximately you have about 6 full-time staff that would be available to assist law enforcement agencies in Thurston County who are interested in participating in the program. The Thurston County Sheriff's Office has been fully supportive of this since the get-go. Very interested in it, but this is some of the significant changes that have occurred that were not noted in the original RFA, but do seem to be fidelity concerns to the lead National Support Bureau. One is that we had originally proposed, this is pre-booking in the field, where law enforcement officers can decide based on a set of predetermined charges that an individual they are responding to might be better served through lead. They get to make that decision. If so, then those individuals are not taken to the jail. They're considered lead eligible if the person decides to participate in that. Originally, because of the size of Thurston County, the geography is a concern. This is a very large county. And so originally we had the concept of we needed to be able to offer to law enforcement agencies a place to take a potentially lead eligible person, rather than wait for us to get to a certain geography in the county when they call. Trying to deal with that response time of the lead program. The funder has said that's not acceptable, that you have to do an in-field response, that you need to show up at the location, Yelm Highway, Yelm, wherever that is. And that has a fundamental change. There is ability to adjust how much funding you request and how much staffing you request to support such a change, but that is a significant change. The other thing that was not in the original RFA that we have been told is what is being requested is that none of the services be provided through Thurston County employees, that all of the staff services that are needed be placed out in community-based agencies. So that's a change, and the reason why that matters in some ways is connected to fidelity, community-based components, that those partnerships are very much part of this process, but it also greatly impacts our match. And so it created a match issue. So that's some of the fundamental components. I'm not sure if John wants to add anything to his perspective on this, but that's hopefully a quick summary of where we are.
Marianne, could you please also explain the project management and the case management component, as well as LEAD's role in selecting our partners, for the LEAD Bureau's role?
Sure. So in the way the project operates, one of the key features is that they have an independent project management. And that is because it is so important to balance the interests of, for example, community groups that are interested in alternatives to jail, criminal justice involvement, those interests, along with the needs of law enforcement agencies, along with the needs of the prosecution and defense components of our community. And so independent project management has been found to be critical for LEAD to be successful. And so they asked that we look at options to place that specific function outside of the county. The Prosecutor's Office was more than happy to look at that. In fact, in a week's time, they found, Wayne Graham, with the support of John, found 3 potential people who would be interested in possibly providing those services should we need to go down that route. Separate from that is so that's kind of at the policy level. How would you make the system work? How do you keep the partners informed? How do you get good agreements and everything in place? That easily was solvable. That was great options. Still a match issue. But the other component is what you would think of as that on-the-ground operation of providing the service to participants who are LEAD eligible. The folks who provide intensive case management, the folks that address the needs identified by the individual who's participating, so that we see the benefits of this program, which includes like 41 less days in jail and cost savings in the thousands per person. So the case management, clinical supervision, those, it's basically 5, it could be a little bit more than that FTE with the money involved, but at least 5 individuals. The model has to use something called harm reduction, which in part, that approach is what the health department uses. It is what we do in a bunch of our programs already. It is a little different than what some community agencies do, but the National LEAD Support Bureau would like to see us have those services offered through a community-based organization.
Hey, Marianne.
Yes.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
This is Romero. Can you elaborate in terms of the match if created an issue when the grantor moved to the community-based organizations to be staffed? Because I believe the intent of the match was somewhat of an in-kind services by Thurston County staff.
Yes.
Can you give us the amount of the match that might be in question?
Okay, so for our original proposal, which is not what would be occurring now, was 1.2 million from grant funds, 300,000 from in-kind funds that the county would provide, for a total of about 1.5 million for this 1-year time period. For any amount of grant funding we took, whatever we ended up agreeing to, it's going to be 25% in kind. So right now, what we've been told by the healthcare authority, should the county want to go forward, They would be looking at an August 1 through June of next year, a funding period where the maximum amount that they would be looking at providing is $1 million for
So,
that.
okay, so it's $250,000 match. Okay,
Right.
thank you.
And when I looked at just some of the initial components of what would still be something the health department would be doing, that would, and I'll give you an example. We have people trained in harm reduction, which is a special model, who can train others. They are qualified nationally to do this kind of work. We do things, thankfully, with support of the county around overdose prevention, education. And when I looked at what would still be about the amount that would be possible and completely fit within this opportunity, we're about $25,000. That's a big gap. $225,000 is a big gap to fill. And though you can apply to any community-based organization, you can ask for a match back. It's something that would have to be carefully considered about what's realistic and what's possible for them to still be able to provide the program. You know, is that 10%, 15%? So we're kind of, either way you do the math, there's about $150,000 gap of concern.
Okay,
Yeah, I'll get to you, Commissioner Menser, but Robin, you had your hand up to give a little more background or financial information, I imagine?
No, actually a finance question. So Marianne, are you saying that the total amount of the grant would be 750,000 or the grant would be $1 million?
Grant would be $1 million.
Then our match would be 330,000 because you don't calculate match on a percent of the grant. The match is the total program cost. So it's not 250, it's 330,000.
Commissioner Menser, go ahead.
I had a question about the other thing, the in-field part, and I didn't quite understand the nuances about, you were saying the response, I think you're talking about from case managers, has to be to the spot in the field versus law enforcement taking them somewhere. And is that the distinction you're making?
Yes.
We thought law enforcement would be able to take them to point X. Instead, they have to wait for the case manager to respond in the field, which was kind of one of the problems as I understood it from the last time around.
Right. And that's why Sheriff offered in many ways to help. We looked at some other options for we did propose like a modified approach where we would start with a place folks could go and look at how to implement that infield in a county this large. And in essence, they basically rejected that, is what they did at their last response, that for them to be successful, it needs to be in the field response.
Do we have more control? Like, I know last time it was Telecare and they were kind of this third party, it's a big corporation. Is there, I mean, understanding that we can't, the county can't necessarily be running these case managers by the terms of the grant, but is there a way for us to put in our contracts or have more control over what they do and put tighter strings so that they have to be immediately responsive and, you know, have X number of staffing? And I don't know, is there just ways to get over this, you know, put them in the middle of the county physically and put controls over conditions that Telecare didn't have and kind of was out of our control, and a way to retain more control?
Mm-hmm. I think based on, so here's what I would say, a couple things. One, there is incredible community interest in this opportunity, which is why Thurston County government has continued to support this. There is an incredible potential for very creative solutions should law enforcement be served as they need served in a grant like this. So yes, I think we could do something in a way that would get highly qualified partners in this process, that lays out the critical elements, and see what proposals and see what people provide back as proposals to address that. so that we make sure our rural communities, all of our communities who would like to participate in this could be served. We would have that ability. And we have, I know our department does, as does the county, have excellent contracting staff, excellent fiscal staff that could help us put those kind of, put that into place in a way that made clear what was needed. This also, unlike previous things, this also is not dependent on being able to bill. For example, some things were dependent previously on being able to bill health insurance for some of the services. This is independent of that. It's a different funding source. It doesn't have some of the same requirements that they were under. It gives us much more flexibility. And we also do have the direct line to the National Lead Support Bureau as a partner who has connections to very rural, high geography places across the US who are implementing this program that have probably had some of the same concerns. And those doors would be open for us to work with them on how to find some solutions.
Jonathan, would you have anything to add, sir?
Commissioner Edwards got a question for me.
I didn't see him waving his hand. Go ahead.
I actually have a couple questions. One of them would be following up on Commissioner Menser's concern about maybe the officers waiting there for quite some period of time until staff was to arrive. If that was the case, could we fund maybe the overtime involved out of treatment sales tax? That might be towards Robin. And if the match is going to require $330,000, that's going to fund FTE activity associated with that. Could that be taken out of treatment sales tax? And maybe one about the field activity. Did I understand that the suspect, the client, is possibly going to be making a field decision? And what about when they're intoxicated or under the influence? So 3 different issues.
So do you have information, either Shelley or Marianne?
Well, actually, I was thinking that perhaps Commissioner Edwards' questions might be best by Sheriff Snaga.
Well, Robin could tell us about the budgetary issue. I'm worried about putting more load on our current expense budget that we obviously don't have enough resources to do business with. That's all.
Or the eligibility of TST?
Yes.
Fund.
Yes, that's right.
I would really defer to Robin's expertise on that one.
So just on the surface, with what very little I know about this program, I think that TST would be an eligible expense, but I would have to look to ensure that that's the case. I think so, but I don't feel like I know enough about this program.
Okay, I guess on a follow-up then, how about from Marianne? Did I hear you? Did I get that right? That the suspect is going to be expected to make decisions that are going to affect the whole outcome of this program, and there's a good chance that law enforcement would be interacting with that person because of their influence of either, I don't know, alcohol or drugs or mental health, whatever it is. And is that the proper time for them to be making that call? That's all I'm wondering, if there isn't some check and balance we can have in.
Yeah, so I guess hopefully this gets at what you mean and what you need to know and what will help is the LEAD program, Law Enforcement Assisted Diversion. The pivotal point is the officer in the field. The pivotal point is their decision making, their knowledge of the circumstances, events, and sometimes the person, because it won't be the first time. That in this instance, for these events that are occurring that they're responding to, they would like to refer this person to LEAD. And so there are decision-making points beyond that, they law enforcement agencies participating would know what charges are eligible. They would also have training and information. All kinds of things would be done to bring them on. But the individual, in essence, is asked to consider the program, and they don't at that moment make the decision to enter it. They agree that this is something that they want to consider. We have the case manager come out, explain it to them, go through it, and then there is a follow-up process with an assessment, go into it. So there's that concern about decision making at that point, really totally understandable, but some of the key components of it are the law enforcement officers' decision that this person may be lead eligible. And that's kind of a little bit of why this is a different dynamic.
Okay, thank you. That kind of clarifies that.
I have a comment regarding the TST. It seems to me the accounting for or recording of the applicable case for TST, that subject A, it might be right up the alley and look really good, and subject B may not. C and D might be, and then all down the alphabet may not apply. And it would, I don't know if that's an accounting nightmare or stat keeping, if that's troublesome or not. With the 6 free employees that we get, not we get, but we're getting that assistance, those other programs. Would Thurston County be how many would we be hiring? Any, if any, and who accounts or reports and manages this grant then? Is that you, Mary Ann? Those are the questions.
Do you want to go, Shelley?
Sure. I was just going to say our original proposal in the first version of this grant was that Thurston County Public Health would hire employees to provide the project management and the case management, and that's what the funder has changed. That's one of the elements that has changed. So we would not be hiring any additional FTEs within the county. That would all be subcontracting out to community-based agencies to provide those services. But Thurston County Public Health would remain the fiscal agent if we were to move forward.
Okay. And would that wouldn't, I saw Mary Ann, I think, shaking her head, that wouldn't be a nightmare trying to account for which clients are TST eligible reimbursement and which ones aren't?
No, it really wouldn't. Yeah, I see Robin feeling that way.
Once we determine that the overall program is eligible, I don't think that we would have that issue, but I would need to know more about this program to say whether or not it's eligible.
Yeah, I'm just concerned myself with the audit. Should there ever be an audit that we're doing?
There would be, I'm sure.
I'm going to go to John Thunheim now. Go ahead, prosecutor.
Well, thanks, and thanks for having this briefing. I have a lot of conflict around what's going on here, just internally. The LEAD, as I think you all know, has been a goal and a vision for the prosecutor's office for several years. We've been trying all these different ways to do this, but the last time we tried it without success, primarily that was because we didn't have the funding we needed to really get it off the ground right. We were trying to do it with Medicaid waiver funding, which put a lot of restrictions and limitations on how you could use that money. And the program was understaffed from the beginning in terms of the case management side and the response side, and that led to slow response times out into the field, frustrated law enforcement, and eventually it just didn't get utilized because there just wasn't that timely response. And as you know, law enforcement lives by response time and by the clock, right? And officers, when they sit on the side of the road, get very antsy because their productivity is measured in them being able to get to the next call. I mean, you all know how this works. So when it didn't work the last time, I kind of resolved to figure out a strategy, if we were going to try it again, to make sure that we had the funding that we needed to do it right. And so when this grant opportunity came out, I was really enthusiastic about it. And thank goodness when I asked Shelley and the sheriff to meet with me and talk about it, they came on board immediately and shared the vision for this and understood the critical importance that this could play in our county strategy. And so I'm going to just stop for a moment and say thank you to both of them for being willing to stick this out. Working with HCA has been pretty frustrating for me, just personally, because it seems like the goalposts have moved from time to time. I understand they're trying to really ensure fidelity, and I get that. And we've done, I think, a remarkable job in accommodating their requests and getting to where they need to be. So it's that frustration on one side of it, but on the other side, I'll tell you, in my opinion, this is a critical strategy. I have a goal to try to keep our current jail population in place even beyond COVID, to really not go backwards in terms of the things that we've accomplished in managing our jail population during the COVID response. And in my view, having something pre-charge and especially pre-booking like this is a critical strategy to accomplish that goal and fills a gap that we just don't have any resources now for a pre-booking kind of option. So the desire to go ahead and to do this for me is pretty strong. I think we can probably overcome the response time issue if it's adequately funded and managed, and there's a clear mission. Last time Telecare was multi-mission, so they were responding in the field not just to law enforcement but to other things as well. This, as I understand it, would be completely focused on the lead response. The other thing I want to just add real quick is that while the sheriff has been a critical partner and remains a prominent piece of this partnership, I really envision opening this up to all the law enforcement agencies, and if not initially, at least very quickly over time, because that's how we manage the jail population. A lot of the folks getting booked are coming from the city agencies, not from the county. And so I just think that this becomes a really, really critical countywide strategy. So, and just the last thing to Robin's point, I have a fairly high level of confidence. I'm not going to say with certainty because, obviously we want to go through the right due diligence, but I have a pretty high confidence that this could qualify for TST funding. It is a case management approach to allow people a pathway to recovery. It uses harm reduction principles, so it's not forced treatment or coerced treatment, but treatment is always available and the case management is always available. And so I think when you look at the treatment, both mental health and substance use disorder treatment components of this, it's going to make it qualified for TST. I think that could happen. So as I sit here right now, I'd say I'd really like to try to do everything we can to see if we can get this up and running, and then over time kind of make it our own and figure out what works best for Thurston County, and then hopefully in a couple of years we can also start to develop or can develop a sustainability strategy to keep it going for the long term. So that's kind of my spiel, and I appreciate the opportunity to give you my thoughts.
Okay. Sheriff Snaza, do you have anything to answer?
Sure. First off, can you folks hear me okay?
Yes.
So kind of where Commissioner Edwards was going with this is that I am supportive of having people who can be diverted in lieu of going to jail. I mean, obviously, we're out there to help our community. The hardest part that I'm going to see is that a different entity dictating how long I'm going to have to wait with somebody before they get help. And I'm not okay with that because, unfortunately, in our county, which has been mentioned earlier, is how large it is and answering the calls for service and the priority one calls that we respond to and how long it takes us to get to priority ones. If I have a deputy sitting on somebody to wait for someone to come out and to deal with the lead program, but then I have a priority one call coming out just a few miles down the road, then I got to leave that one person to handle the priority one, or I got to wait for another unit to get out to that call. So those are my concerns. And I don't like the fact that the grant, the way they've changed it. And I know that monies are tight. And obviously we're all dealing with budget issues or constraints. And I was hoping that this lead program would definitely benefit, like John was saying, all agencies, not just Thurston County Sheriff's Office. But I can tell you, if I have a deputy out waiting a couple hours for someone to get themselves out there, and then my deputy has to stand by to wait for the person to take that person through the questionnaires and stuff, and whether they need to stay there because the concern if the person's high or intoxicated and can become combative or belligerent, or what is that atmosphere in where we contact that individual. Those are all my concerns. So obviously a deputy's going to want to stand by for the safety of the individual being there. And that's why I was hoping that they want us to do the infield. And I was really hoping that we had a place that we could take the individual to where they could be secured, and that both the individual doing the work and the person who is going through the diversion process are both in safe places. And I don't know how many people that go out to a call, whether they're going to use one or two, and I'm hopefully it would be two out in the field to be able to protect each other. But anyway, my concerns are the safety aspect of it and the time that it takes for them to respond and the time that they use up my deputy. Because after all this is said and done through that version, and my deputy still has to go back and write a report about the whole entire incident. And so obviously we've been dealing with overtime issues as far as, what our overtime looks like, why it looks like that. And kind of hoping that Robin will be able to find out for sure if TST will cover it, or how we're going to be covered in the process of being able to make up for that deputy's lost time.
Thank you, Sheriff. I have the same concern about having another entity having control over deputies' time and other factors. And much like even with a DCR, when you call a DCR out, they have a maximum of 2 hours with which they need to respond. And I think this goes to Ty's point about building something in the contract or the agreement where we have accounting or some type of control over the response time and over that employee that's responding. Did I capture that right, Ty? Was that what you're talking about?
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I kind of agree with the prosecutor, and I agree with the sheriff. I don't think that, and I understand that was a big sticking point, because what I think will happen is the sheriff's deputies will just not, to the extent they've got gray area and they're making discretionary calls, it's gonna be difficult for them to make that call that's gonna hang them up for potentially hours. And that was what I understood didn't work very well last time, and I was hoping we would be able to get past. So that's why I was kind of fishing through with Marianne for ideas about how we could make this work better and make the sheriff feel comfortable that it's going to work better, and that we know that it is going to work better. I think it will, just because, I think it will work considerably better just the way it's structured, but can we get it all the way to the finish line where we're all happy with it, where it's not just working better, but actually working well? And that's, so yeah, that goes to Hutch's question there. I don't know, maybe we need, I don't know the answer. Maybe we need 12 and we need to increase our grant amount, and ask for more money, because it's really going to take 12 people to actually these folks going to be on, if there's 5 to 6 people, that doesn't cover 24/7, unless they're kind of on just an on call basis. So I'm not really sure. And the situations could happen any time of day or night, I would imagine. So I guess my questions are, is that is our grant appropriately scaled to make the sheriff's concerns addressed? Which is, I think his concerns are all of our concerns to some degree. Those are just questions I have, because I agree with John Thunheim that I think this is really an important strategy. I mean, we've been hearing, I know the sheriff himself has said, I don't want to, I don't want my jail to be a mental health place. Commissioner Hutchings has said that multiple times. I've said that multiple times. The community wants to see some effort to try to come up with new systems. And this is a nationally recognized system that has money on the table, and we've applied and we've been essentially approved. And I would hate to see us miss this opportunity because we can't iron out certain wrinkles. If there's a possibility of doing what John says, which is continuing to keep our jail population numbers down, we're going to save money. I'm a little less worried about, some of the financial pieces, because I'm certain that this is cost-effective policy. But we also have to make sure it doesn't gum up our law enforcement efficiency as well.
Commissioner, you hit a couple points that I think there are key. I think the strategy for dealing with that response, the best one for us to do is to actually put performance requirements into the contract with whoever we contract, which has very specific requirements about what a response time is and what the performance expectations are for this program, and actually define success by a short response time, so that the entity or agency has a performance goal of getting out there as quickly as possible. And I think that's what we can do. And, hopefully if it's upfront and somebody is contracting with us and agreeing to those terms up front, then they'll be incentivized to want to reach those performance expectations. And so I think that's what we do. And I also agree with you that we probably need to ask for what we feel like we realistically need to make that happen. And there might be some need to look at expansion, and HCA has said they're open to that, I suppose, within reasonable limitations. And I just also want to say something that I actually also share the sheriff's concern about the safety of everybody during this handoff. But I have to say, I can't imagine either HCA or even the lead national agency requiring us to do a handoff under unsafe circumstances. So I have to think that if we're talking about a handoff, at 3 o'clock in the morning on the side of Tilley Road in South County or something, that there would be some allowance to be able to do a quick transport to some nearby location where that handoff could be done safely, at least so it's not on the side of the road. And I just can't imagine the lead people saying otherwise. So I think there are ways that we can negotiate our way through that and protect not only the deputies, but also protect the person who they've detained and the case manager who's responding out. So I think there's got to be a solution for that. I just can't imagine that the HCA and the other folks are going to say you have to do this in a dangerous way, and that's, I think, how I would pose it to them.
Thank you. I'd like to get Larry Jefferson to chime in on this, to get his perspective as well, if you have anything to add, Larry.
Yeah, well, I guess what I'll add is that I will agree with Mr. Thunheim, and I will agree with our sheriff that the response time is the most critical issue, that we had formerly, and it's the most critical. At the bottom line, this has to be something that the officer wants to do and thinks that this would be good for this situation, because I've run into so-and-so, this is the third time, and I can finally see something from so-and-so that I need some assistance with so-and-so that is different than just taking them to jail. So it has to be completely at the officer's discretion, and they have to believe that it's going to work. I guess what I'd like to remind you is that this model has worked all around the nation, and that parts of this model has worked even in our own town. In Olympia, and it's happened in safe ways. It's just that in the city of Olympia, as the sheriff knows, the response time is a lot shorter. So they're just easier to get to. But those officers, when they create relationships with their peer counselors, are not going to put those peer counselors in dangerous situations. They're just not going to do it because the relationships go both ways. And so once the officer starts to see success, and especially from people that they never thought that they would see success from, that's where this will start to grow, and that's when this will start to take off. But in that initial, the officers are only going to try this once or twice. So those first 2 times, you got to say yes, and you got to respond fast. And if you don't do that, then you might as well pack up and go home. So I'm hopeful that we're going to take a bold step together to get this program, because I share in the goal of keeping the jail population as low as it's been. It's been the greatest reform that I think that's happened in our county in all the time that I've worked here at drastically reducing our jail population to where it should be, to where we can have a good start to do some more incredible things from. So those are my comments, and that this works and that we can do it. Thanks.
Well, before I get to Mary Ann Claire, I just want to respond to what you said. Law enforcement will be pretty much the backbone of this, and they're going to ensure its success or failure. And word of mouth is just enormous. And so if they have a couple of failures or a couple of successes, that's going to determine the fate, I think, of LEAD, perhaps. Mary Ann Claire, do you have anything to add? Then I'll circle back to Commissioner Edwards.
I do. I really want to compliment everyone who spent a lot of time working on this. I know that John Thunheim, Shelley, and the sheriff have put a lot of time and effort into the ideas of this. And I know Marianne O'Garo has put a lot of work into working with the Healthcare Authority for this. And Larry, you're right that when you talk about taking a bold step and working with getting law enforcement on board and that they need the success. I've done some program development in this county with some people who have had hesitancy in getting programs started. And once they start to see success, I think that it will really take off. When we did mental health court and veterans court, we saw the same thing. And you all have seen the success that those programs have had. I think it would be an incredible opportunity for us to offer this program as a resource for law enforcement if it's done well and they have access to timely law enforcement, or timely response, like you've all said. Sheriff, you talked about you also don't want your deputies sitting on the side of the road while they're doing the forms. And I think working with the National Lead Response Bureau, I don't think that that's their intention, and having some of their technical assistance is an opportunity for us as well. One of the things with the treatment sales tax funding, my concern is with that resource that it won't be as stable. I'll defer to Robin, and that we'll be in a position of having to decide where we want to go and our priorities as well. But I think that Commissioner Menzer, you said that you're not as concerned with that because you see this as a cost saving, and I do too, because this is on the front end. And looking at our jail population, I've noticed that our pretrial population is increasing as opposed to those who are convicted, which means more people in jail that aren't convicted are there. And so that's what I've been paying attention to as the pretrial services director. And so I really am invested in coming up with solutions for those individuals that are there as well. And I think that this is a great opportunity for our county and would support looking at it and what I could do to move forward with it to help it succeed.
Thank you, Marianne. Do you want to address that, Robin? You had your hand up too. Then I'll circle back to the commissioners.
So on a policy level, I think this is an exciting opportunity for our county, and I hope we can find a path forward. But I just want to echo what a few people have said is in that it needs to be properly funded. If it's not properly funded, there's no way it can succeed. So at this point in time, before we say yes, I think we need to take a really hard look and make sure that we've identified all the different costs that need to be covered. I do have a question about the grant. I'm looking back at the grant approvals. At the same time as we applied for the HCA grant, there was also a grant application that went to WASPIC, I think out of the Prosecutors Office. Do you know if we were successful in that award as well?
No, my understanding is because the HCA decided to select us, the WASPIC decided not to. And actually, Olympia Police received funding from WASPIC for their program, their Friendly Faces program.
So that's not funding that we could count. I do think, just again, we've got to do a better review, but just on the face of it, I think we could use TST. To Mary Ann's point, TST is pretty much allocated at this point in time. So the board would need to set priorities and decide what you're not going to fund that you're currently paying for with TST money in order to fund this. So there's a trade-off there. And then none of the original grant applications included additional funding for the prosecutor's office, public defense, or the sheriff's office. So if we're hearing now that there needs to be more money for those things, that's something that we would need to factor in. And I would also say that while this does have a great potential for less people in our jail, that the corrections budget doesn't work to where you can create savings and reduce the corrections budget for each person you keep out of the jail.
Right.
You have to close an entire unit to be able to create savings in corrections. So unless we're talking about an entire pod and the associated staffing going down, it's not like we would have savings in corrections that we could divert to this effort. So just keep that in mind as well.
All right, Commissioner Edwards, you've been on pause for a bit. Do you have anything?
Yes. I think that Larry Jefferson is probably an exceptional expert when it comes to dealing with this situation. And I think he's right on. We need that municipal participation if we're going to have this succeed. Responding out to Skookumchuck Road or something just isn't going to work. And we need to think about the response times that are going to take place beyond the length of time it takes to get there. You're going to find that most of this activity that requires a response is probably going to take place between 8 at night and 4 in the morning. And between that, allotting some of our resources to those social workers that will be working this. But if we don't have some type of municipal coordination right up front to get this going, I have my doubts that it can succeed. Mainly because of what Larry said. If we have a couple failures right in a row, word gets out, this isn't working. And that's what's going to undoubtedly happen if we're going to depend on rural America making this work. So I think it's just ever more important that we get the municipal participation in. And then I think we can get everything else probably to fit if we get that going.
Thank you. Commissioner Menser?
Just a couple of responses to all the things that I heard there. One is most recently Robin's point about, I get what she's saying about, the corrections budget, but it's a system. when you're diverting people out of that system and they're being handled by a case manager that's funded by the state, that is clerk staff time, that is judge time, that is prosecutor time, that is public defense time. This down the ripple effect, it may be hard to quantify, and it may take a few years to wrinkle out. It may manifest in the next time that the public defender needs an extra attorney because the case filings are down. It may manifest in the, how many resources the prosecutor's office needs over the long haul. It may turn into, discussion about the flex unit. It may turn into there is no way that less cases flowing into a very cumbersome criminal justice apparatus that involves 6 or 7 different agencies is not going to save the county money and resources over time if you're doing it differently. So I just wanted to respond to that. And the second is just, as commissioners, we're out talking to the public, and they're speaking at a very high level. There's too many mentally ill people in the jail. That's not a good way to change behaviors because they're not getting the treatment they need. But they don't understand the systems. It's us right here that actually understand the systems and the finances and what's involved to solve that problem. So it's one thing to say, I agree with you, but then we have to come back to this little Zoom room or this table, so to speak, virtual table, to try to find solutions. What does it mean to actually have crisis situations in the community, have community members have somebody to call? It's almost always going to be police, at least right now, till we get, something else. And it's going to mean the criminal justice apparatus gets, it takes a lot of effort to develop systems in place to get these things changed. So you could start building, for example, mental health hospitals. You could build as many mental health hospitals as you want. Until you have systems that link those crisis situations in people's homes and on street corners to those mental health hospitals, you're not going to accomplish anything. So this is difficult. It's hard work, but it's directly responsive to communities' need. And I just think that, it's worth our effort to try to iron out these wrinkles because there's no other way. You don't wave a wand and magically make this kind of a problem solved. You have to work on it and get it done.
So Romero, I'm going to turn to you now because we've been at this for an hour, and I'd like to know, or whomever has the answer, what are the next steps, and what kind of decision point or date are we under, time constraint wise? Because we have a closed session to get to.
Yeah, and that's what. Thank you, Commissioner. What I'm hearing is there's other questions, additional questions that perhaps needs to be answered in terms of what is the actual cost. Whether we have enough funding and with the $1.3 million. There's additional questions whether we can, I believe we can have a contract creating or putting some constraints or expectations on the response time. But it's going to be a response time issue, I believe, and how we can overcome that, is yet to be seen. Seems to me that this was a great meeting to have because it seems to be a great energy behind as to how this program can be built from the ground up and be successful. But the concern that I have is I like to probably ask Mary Ann, there is an expectation by the grantor for the county to say, yes, we're going to be accepting the grant. And I believe we're behind that already. So Mary Ann, can you give us some perspective as to what the expectations of the grantor are right now? The county needs to make a decision to accept the grant or not?
Sure. So I would start off with just one kind of good faith effort so you're aware. The Healthcare Authority actually canceled the RFA and the conditions of the original RFA to be able to work with Thurston County to address their concerns about fidelity. So they have made some meaningful changes to what the obligations they were under because they would like to see Thurston County under contract. They would like this to work here. We were notified in March. We've been kind of going back and forth over good reason, as today's meeting shows you. They really do need kind of an answer of whether we would like to move forward with the contracting process. They feel that they've told us what they need. They need an in-field response where we contract out these pieces to community-based organizations. They have no further concerns. They had other concerns, we've addressed them. They would like to know if we would like to move forward with the contracting process. And the maximum amount is 1 million from the grant for August through next June. Probably, should something go forward, we would have room to build on our experience to request more funding. But they do feel that covers the 6 FTE minimum. It actually could probably cover more. That they feel is critical to make this work and have seen it work other places. So I can respond in any way you want. I just need to be able to tell them something. I do think a timeline of we will tell them by is really important for me. But it can't stay. It's been since March, and we've been working with them. But
So without putting you on the spot, is it today or is it next week?
I would be more than happy to. I told them we were meeting today. They're very pleased to know that, because you're taking it so seriously. You care so much about this. If I could respond by not obviously this Friday, but by next Friday, that would be a wonderful thing to be able to tell them.
That would give us time to figure out the funding, perhaps, as well as if they're enthused about having it here in Thurston County and they cancel the RFA and they want to get in contract, then we can work with them regarding some type of controls that we would have on those employees. Go ahead, Romero.
So, so I guess what I'm looking for is, aside from the funding, and I believe the sheriff has been, clear in terms of his concerns related to the response time, and John Thunheim offered perhaps an option as to how we can probably have a performance contract with the third-party providers. But that needs to be discussed a little more in detail, because as Commissioner Edwards stated, is in Skookumchuck and the furthest part of the county, the response time for a social worker, to get there is going to be an issue, because they're not going to be going with an emergency light to get there in a timely manner. So, and that's something that sure needs to be considered in terms of that. And anyways, some thoughts.
Go ahead, Commissioner Mentor.
Oh, just on that topic, somebody made reference to the fact that the lead is going in different places in the country, and some of them are quite rural. Can we get some input from them about how they've managed this problem? I mean, this can't be a unique problem. If they've applied the lead program to rural areas, then they had to have confronted this problem. And do they have any wisdom for us on how to structure the contracts, or what the staffing level needs to look like to iron out those types of situations?
Right, right. Thank you, Commissioner. And I was going to suggest the National Lead Support, group, the National Lead group should have some data in terms of what is the response time in rural areas. If this program is implemented, maybe, I don't know if in a week, Marianne can probably reach out to them and find out, at least to have some substance.
I would be glad to talk to them more about that. One thing I would say to you, like their commitment to us, should we partner with them on this, their commitment is to offer the full support of problem solving through the National Lead Support Bureau for everything we identify as an issue, and to help us work through that and make those connections. So we may not have all the answers completely, but we've made it very clear some of our concerns. And that is why that group is tied to this project, so that they are there every step of the way to assist you through that barrier and future barriers too. So okay. I'll do some talking, but no, they mean it when that's why it's provided to you at no cost, to make sure you get connected, whether that be in rural Georgia or wherever you need for any of your barriers.
Okay, so
I got to throw something in.
Yeah,
I have to say there's a big difference between rural Georgia and rural Washington. Georgia's got like 100 counties or something. I mean, Minnesota, Wisconsin. They're very small jurisdictions, and they call them rural America. There's a big difference in the Western United States where we've got 39 counties in the same size state. So that is a big issue as you review some of those facts. And I would like to have Larry Jefferson involved in this right down to the nitty gritty. I would make me feel pretty comfortable.
Well, he has been and will continue, I would imagine. And I know that was an example. Georgia was an example, because you'll get more data from that. Thank you.
So
when will this come back, Romero?
So considering that they perhaps given us a week, based on Mary Ann, if we can get an extension to provide a formal response from the county by next Friday, I will bring this item again next Thursday morning. And hopefully that will give us enough time to answer some of the questions that was raised today. And at that point, I will really like to see a direction as to what will be the next steps on this one.
All right, so Sheriff, Prosecutor, Public Defense, Larry, Public Health, Pretrial, Finance. Thank you all for joining in. And this is very good work, very hard work, and but it's very important. So thank you all very much. We're going to end this now and move into a closed session. Is that a separate, we'll just shut it down then, we're done.
Can you announce the closed session and then we'll shut it down, Commissioner?
I'm happy to. The Board of County Commissioners is going to a closed door session pursuant to RCW 42.30.140 subsection 2. That portion of a meeting of a quasi-judicial body which relates to a quasi-judicial matter between named parties as distinguished from a matter having general effect on the public or on a class or group. It's the Mankey appeal. Board decision may follow. We may expect this to last about 30 minutes.
Yeah, and please, can you shut down the live stream? And all of you participants, can you leave the Zoom meeting, please? And Elizabeth Petrus needs to remain.